Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're digging into some really intense historical sources, stuff that honestly reads less like dry history and more like, well, a warning sign.
It really does. It's like a blueprint for how fear and division, especially when the legal system breaks down, can just completely tear a community apart.
And the focus for this deep dive is the Salem Witch Trials of 1692. It's a story most people think they know, right? Hysteria, superstition.
Yeah, but it gets reduced way too much. When you actually dig into the historical accounts, the court records, the research, you see it was this catastrophic, perfect storm. Social pressures, political chaos, religious beliefs, even psychological factors all hitting at once.
Exactly. So our mission today is to get past those myths. We've really immersed ourselves in these records, and we want to give you a shortcut to understanding the complex machinery behind it all. You know, the social gears, the legal failures, the political maneuvering that let a, frankly, localized panic just explode.
We want to get beyond just who was accused and executed. The real question is why. Why did the normal rules of evidence, of reason, even basic fairness just evaporate?
It seems like everything had to go wrong at exactly the same time.
That's a great way to put it. Salem Village was like a powder keg just waiting for a match. It wasn't one single thing. It was maybe half a dozen critical factors colliding in a very short, intense period.
Okay, so let's set the scene properly. Imagine this. Salem Village, Massachusetts. It's the deep, brutal winter of 1692.
Right. And this isn't Salem Town, the port. This is Salem Village, a small, pretty isolated farming community, maybe 500 people tops. Very rigid, very Puritan.
Life revolved around the church, around this strict hierarchy, and God is, well, everywhere, but so is the devil in their minds.
Absolutely. And at the center of this little world is the parsonage, home of the minister, Reverend Samuel Parris. Now, within this rigid structure, who's at the very bottom?
The children, especially the young women.
Exactly. Which brings us straight to the first key figures. 9-year-old Elizabeth Parris, Betty, the minister's own daughter.
And her 11-year-old cousin, Abigail Williams, an orphan living there too.
They were essentially powerless. In that society, their lives, their futures, pretty much mapped out already. Limited options.
So maybe to escape that rigidity or just out of boredom or curiosity, the sources tell us they started experimenting, gathering secretly with others.
Including Reverend Parris's enslaved woman, 𝐃𝐄𝐄𝐏. And they were trying to do something forbidden, trying to divine the future.
Yeah, the specific thing mentioned is this folk magic trick, a Venus glass. Sounds almost innocent, doesn't it?
It does, but not to the Puritans. You float an egg white in water, right? Hoping the shapes tell you who you'll marry, what your life will be like.
But any kind of fortune-telling, any attempt to know God's plan was seen as dealing with the devil, a huge transgression.
The story goes, the vision they saw wasn't a handsome husband. It was a coffin.
Chilling. Whether it was real, suggested, or just fear playing tricks, it felt real to them. And then very soon after, mid-January 1692, things started to go terribly wrong in the parsonage.
The silence was shattered. Violently.
Okay, so this feels like the real start. Section 1. The spark hits the powder keg. Let's talk about this initial affliction.
Right. The symptoms Betty and Abigail started showing were, well, terrifying. Utterly baffling to everyone around them.
What are we talking about specifically?
Uncontrollable screaming fits, suddenly throwing things, lashing out, speaking what sounded like complete gibberish.
And the physical stuff. Their bodies contorting.
Yeah, into shapes people swore were impossible. They complained constantly being pinched, bitten, choked by something invisible.
We have eyewitness accounts, don't we? Like Reverend John Hale.
We do. He was a minister from nearby Beverly, initially involved, though later became critical. He wrote about seeing their necks and backs twist in ways that seemed physically impossible, quote, beyond the power of any epileptic fits.
So even careful observers were convinced this wasn't, faking or just a normal illness.
Exactly. Reverend Parris tried everything he knew. Prayer, fasting, nothing worked. So he finally calls in the local doctor, William Griggs.
And Dr. Griggs observes them for weeks.
He does. The sources stress he was thorough. He looked for known diseases, physical causes, found nothing. The fits were too erratic, too violent, didn't fit any known pattern.
So here's this doctor operating within the 17th century mindset. He's ruled out the natural causes he knows. What's left?
In their world, physical problems often pointed to spiritual ones. If you had constant bad luck, maybe the devil was messing with you. If you had these kinds of extreme, inexplicable physical torments.
It had to be a spiritual attack.
Precisely. So Dr. Griggs delivers his diagnosis. And it's the diagnosis that essentially lights the fuse. The evil hand is upon them.
Bewitched.
Bewitched. And importantly, this wasn't seen as like a wild guess or mass panic setting in yet. For them, it was a reasoned, terrifying medical and theological deduction. It was the logical conclusion within their framework.
But it gave the community official permission to believe the worst.
And that diagnosis landed on a community that was already fragile, stressed, divided. It was, as you said, the perfect powder keg.
Okay, let's unpack why it was so fragile. What were those pre-existing stresses? You mentioned layers of anxiety.
Yeah, there were at least 3 huge ones simmering under the surface. First, massive ongoing trauma from war. King William's War.
Right. This conflict with the French and their Native American allies had been dragging on since 1688.
And for people in Massachusetts, especially near the frontier like Essex County, this wasn't distant news. It was immediate danger. Settlements were being raided, burned, people they knew were being killed or captured.
So real, constant fear. And refugees.
Exactly. Traumatized refugees were flooding into safer areas like Essex County, straining everything: food, land, housing, patience. And crucially, the enemy, particularly the Native Americans allied with the French, were often seen through a theological lens.
As agents of the devil?
Pretty much. The devil was perceived as being physically active in the wilderness, working through these enemy forces. So the idea of a diabolical enemy wasn't abstracted. It felt very real and very close.
And some of the afflicted girls themselves had connections to this violence.
Yes. Several were orphans or had directly lost family in these frontier attacks. They carried significant psychological trauma, which likely made them more susceptible to, well, whatever was happening. Their terror was probably rooted in very real past experiences.
Okay, so that's layer 1, the trauma of war. What's the second pressure point?
Politics, or rather the lack of stable politics. A total power vacuum. The colony's charter, its legal basis for existence granted by England, had been revoked back in 1684.
8 years before the trials.
8 years. They were in political limbo. No legitimate recognized governor, no stable courts, no clear legal authority from England. They were effectively leaderless and constantly worried about what the crown would do next.
What did that mean practically, like for everyday governance?
It meant everything was uncertain. Land titles could be questioned. Local governance was makeshift. There was no trusted higher authority to appeal to. People felt adrift, maybe even felt God had abandoned them politically.
So that breeds anxiety and probably makes people cling more tightly to local, maybe less rational forms of authority, like the church.
Absolutely. And then finally, a new governor, William Phips, arrives with a new charter in May 1692. But he walks right into the middle of the witchcraft crisis, which is already exploding.
Dag timing.
Terrible timing. He has to act fast. So he sets up this special emergency court, the Court of Oyer and Terminer, meaning to hear and determine. But it's set up hastily, possibly cutting legal corners, without the usual checks and balances because of the crisis atmosphere and that long legal vacuum preceding it.
Okay, so war trauma, political vacuum. What was the third layer? The internal stuff.
Yes. The poison within Salem Village itself. This place was tearing itself apart long before any witches were mentioned. Bitter, entrenched factional feuds.
This wasn't just disagreements. This was deep-seated hatred.
Oh, yeah. It basically split the village, often along geographical and economic lines. On one side, you had the Putnam family and their allies.
Describe them.
The Putnams were part of the Old Guard. Wealthy landowners, primarily farmers. Very traditional, very conservative in their outlook, fiercely protective of the church's authority, and they were the main supporters financially and politically of the very rigid Reverend Paris. They kind of represented the village's agrarian past.
Okay, and who is opposing them?
The Porter family and their network. The Porters were also wealthy, but their wealth and influence were tied more to the rising commercial economy of Salem Town, the nearby port. They were merchants, involved in trade. They represented a more modern, outward-looking commercial future.
A future the Putnams probably feared or resented.
Deeply. The sources show constant fighting between these factions in town meetings, church meetings, arguing over land boundaries, taxes, church decisions, and especially over Reverend Paris himself, his salary, his demands.
So every public gathering was potentially a battleground.
Pretty much. The witchcraft accusations didn't create this conflict. They landed right in the middle of it and became a terrifying new weapon. It offered a way to frame these long-standing economic and social grudges as a holy war against Satan's agents.
And because of the political vacuum, there was no higher court to appeal to settle these disputes rationally.
Exactly. Suing each other wasn't really working effectively, but accusing your enemy's faction of witchcraft, Suddenly, that had the backing of this emergency court and divine justification.
Wow. Okay, so the stage is well and truly set. This brings us to section 2, the catalyst. The witchcraft diagnosis is official. The pressure is now immense on Betty and Abigail to name names.
Intense pressure. Who's doing this to you? Who is the devil using? And on February 29, 1692, they finally point fingers.
And their choices seem strategic, deliberate almost.
Whether consciously planned or just instinctively finding the easiest targets, they accused the 3 most vulnerable people in Salem Village. The outsiders. The ones the community would most readily believe could be witches.
The path of least resistance.
Definitely. Let's look at who they were. First, 𝐃𝐄𝐄𝐏.
We mentioned her Reverend Paris's enslaved woman from Barbados, identified in the records as an Indian woman.
Right, probably of Arawak or Carib background, not African as sometimes depicted later. But the key thing is, she was an outsider in every sense. Racially, culturally, linguistically, socially, and enslaved. The perfect scapegoat.
Okay, who was second?
Sarah Good. Basically, a homeless beggar, pregnant at the time, known for being difficult. A social nuisance.
She smoked a pipe, which was frowned upon for women.
Yes, and she had a reputation for bad carriage, muttering under her breath, maybe perceived curses when people turned her away. She didn't fit the mold of the deferential poor woman.
So she was already marked as deviant, making the witch label easier to stick.
Precisely. And the third was Sarah Osborne.
What was her story?
She was elderly, often bedridden. But her real crime wasn't poverty or muttering, it was property and social standing. She had angered the powerful Putnam family by trying to claim control over her late husband's estate for herself and her sons from a previous marriage, bypassing her current husband.
Okay, so a legal dispute with the Putnams.
Yes, and she compounded her sin by having married her own indentured servant after her husband died. A huge social scandal, crossing class lines like that.
So all 3 women were already outside the core power structure, already viewed negatively for different reasons.
Absolutely. When they were named, you can imagine the community breathing a sigh of relief, thinking, okay, phew. The problem's contained, it's just these marginal figures.
But that wasn't the end of it. 𝐃𝐄𝐄𝐏's role becomes absolutely central here.
It's the pivot point. Consider her position. She's enslaved. No rights. Being interrogated by these powerful magistrates, John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin. And the records suggest, maybe even state, that her owner, Reverend Paris, physically abused her, beat her, demanding she confess.
While Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne insisted they were innocent.
Yes, they maintained their innocence, which, tragically, was a death sentence for them. 𝐃𝐄𝐏, however, seems to have made a calculated choice for survival. She would confess.
But not just any confession.
No. This is critical. She didn't just say, okay, I did it. She gave them a narrative, a huge, terrifying narrative that played directly into their deepest Puritan fears about the devil and organized conspiracy.
And importantly, the narrative she gave wasn't based on her own cultural background from Barbados, right?
Not primarily, no. She seems to have absorbed and then reflected back the specific details of English and European witchcraft lore, the stuff her Puritan interrogators expected and feared. She essentially gave them the screenplay for their nightmare.
What kind of details are we talking about?
Really specific, vivid stuff. She described meeting a tall man of Boston, a figure representing the devil dressed all in black who demanded she serve him.
The classic devil figure.
Exactly. She talked about the devil's book, how he urged her to sign it. She even described seeing other names already in it, implying a larger conspiracy. She pointed to marks on her body as proof of this pact.
And the animal familiars, those sound particularly chilling.
They were designed to be a great black dog, a hog, 2 cats, 1 black, 1 red. And this really disturbing image of a yellow bird that supposedly sucked blood from between Sarah Good's fingers. This made the supernatural threat feel tangible, physical.
But the absolute killer blow, the part that escalated everything,
was her claim that it wasn't just the 3 of them. She confirmed Good and Osborne were witches, yes, but then she added there was 4 women and 1 man. She insisted there were others, a wider conspiracy, actively working together to hurt the children and undermine the colony.
Wow. So she takes it from being about 3 outcasts to being about an organized underground network of Satan's agents.
Precisely. Her confession transformed the entire situation. It wasn't a local policing matter anymore. It was suddenly a colony-wide security emergency. She validated the magistrate's deepest fears of an organized evil operating right there in Salem Village.
And by telling them their story back to them, basically she made her testimony incredibly believable and powerful.
She survived, but in doing so, she inadvertently opened the floodgates. She gave the court the justification it needed to hunt for that wider conspiracy.
Which leads us directly into Section 3, the system fails. 𝐃𝐄𝐄𝐏's confession acts like fuel on the fire.
It really does. It becomes the proof of concept for the court. The magistrates, feeling totally validated now, essentially deputize the afflicted girls.
How so?
Their spectral sight, their ability to see the invisible specters or spirits of the witches attacking them, is suddenly treated as infallible evidence, like a divine gift allowing them to see the devil's hidden army.
So the accusers are empowered.
Yeah.
And the accusation starts spreading.
Like wildfire. They move rapidly from those initial fringe targets, 𝐃𝐄𝐄𝐏 right into the heart of the Salem Village community. And Salem Town and Andover, it spreads geographically too.
And this becomes a way to settle old scores, those factional feuds we talked about.
Absolutely. Suddenly you could accuse your longtime rival in a land dispute like the Putnams did with the Nurse family and frame it not as petty revenge, but as rooting out evil. It became a sanctified way to destroy your enemies.
So in March and April of '92, we start seeing accusations against people who were previously considered untouchable.
Yes, pillars of the community. Martha Corey, a respected covenanted church member known for her piety. Rebecca Nurse, a 71-year-old matriarch, universally admired for her godliness and charity.
And people with property and standing, like John and Elizabeth Proctor.
Right, wealthy landowners, tavern keepers, people who were established, respected members of society. Their accusations sent shockwaves.
Let's focus on Rebecca Nurse's case. It seems particularly symbolic of the system's collapse.
It really is. Her accusation was genuinely shocking. Nobody could quite believe it. She was the epitome of Puritan piety. The accusation came primarily from members of the Putnam faction, remember, who had land disputes with the Nurse family.
So the motivation seems transparent, at least with hindsight.
It does. And her trial was just harrowing. Showing the community wasn't entirely swept away, 39 neighbors risked signing a petition testifying to her good character, her lifelong piety.
That took courage.
Incredible courage in that atmosphere. And based on that testimony, and maybe their own conscience, the jury initially did something remarkable. They returned a verdict of not guilty.
Wow. So there was a moment where it seemed like reason might prevail.
A brief moment.
Yeah.
But then chaos erupted. The instant the verdict was read, the afflicted girls in the courtroom went into violent convulsions, shrieking that Nurse's specter was attacking them right there, torturing them for being found innocent.
The courtroom itself becomes the site of spectral attack.
Exactly. And the Chief Justice, William Stoughton, steps in. Stoughton was. Well, let's just say he was deeply invested in the reality of the witchcraft conspiracy and the validity of the trials. He was not impartial.
He pressured the jury.
He did. He asked them to reconsider, focusing on a comment Nurse had apparently made earlier. When another confessed witch was brought in, Nurse, perhaps expressing surprise, had said something like, "What, is she one of us?" Meaning perhaps one of the accused prisoners.
But Stoughton twisted it.
Or allowed it to be interpreted as one of us witches. The crucial tragic detail is that Rebecca Nurse was elderly, frail, and quite deaf. She likely didn't hear or understand Stoughton asking her to clarify her remark amidst the courtroom chaos.
So she remained silent.
Her silence, combined with the girl's dramatic fits and Stoughton's clear bias, was taken by the terrified, pressured jury as confirmation of guilt. They were sent back to deliberate again.
And they changed their verdict.
They returned guilty. Governor Phipps actually granted her a brief reprieve later, but the pro-trial faction, likely led by Stoughton, successfully pressured him to withdraw it. Rebecca Nurse, this symbol of piety, was hanged on July 19, 1692.
The message that sent must have been terrifying.
It was crystal clear. No one is safe. Piety, reputation, community support. None of it matters if the accusers point at you and the court accepts their spectral claims.
Which brings us to the core legal problem. Spectral evidence itself. Let's define that again really clearly.
Okay, spectral evidence is the testimony of an afflicted person claiming that they were attacked, tormented, or visited by the specter or spirit shape of the accused person, while the accused person's physical body was somewhere else entirely.
So I could be asleep in my bed, but my specter could supposedly be off choking someone across town.
Exactly. And the victim's testimony about seeing your specter doing this was taken as proof that you were the witch responsible.
How could anyone possibly defend against that? It's unfalsifiable.
It is legally unfalsifiable. You can't produce an alibi for your spirit. The court's justification, particularly Stoughton's, rested on a key Puritan theological assumption that the devil could not impersonate an innocent person, could not take the shape of someone without their permission.
So, if someone saw your specter, you must have made a pact with the devil, giving him permission to use your form.
That was the logic. Therefore, the victim's spectral sighting was direct proof of the accused's covenant with Satan.
But wasn't there debate about this even then, among the ministers?
Oh, absolutely. This was a huge point of contention. Prominent Boston ministers, especially Increase Mather, who was president of Harvard College, argued strongly against relying on spectral evidence.
What was his argument?
It was quite sophisticated, theologically. Mather basically said, wait a minute, the devil is the father of lies. His entire goal is to deceive and create chaos. Why wouldn't he impersonate an innocent person precisely to condemn them and undermine the community's faith and justice?
So relying on spectral evidence was essentially taking the devil's word for it.
That was Mather's point. He urged extreme caution, arguing conviction should rely on things like free confession without torture or clear, tangible evidence of witchcraft, not just these spectral claims.
But the court of Oyer and Terminer, especially Stoughton, ignored this advice.
They largely rejected it. Stoughton seemed to believe that doubting the spectral visions meant doubting the suffering of the victims and essentially siding with the devil against God's afflicted children. He was utterly convinced of the specter's reality as evidence.
So this hastily formed court in this crisis atmosphere basically threw out established common law principles requiring concrete proof.
In essence, yes. They prioritized spectral testimony, which led directly to this legal catastrophe where accusation equaled conviction for anyone who didn't confess.
And the person who seemed to see this disaster unfolding most clearly and spoke out against it was John Proctor.
Yes, John Proctor. A prosperous farmer, also ran a tavern, described as physically imposing, outspoken, not easily cowed.
And he was skeptical from early on.
Deeply skeptical. He openly called the whole thing a scam, a fraud. He thought the afflicted girls were faking it, maybe for attention, maybe for power.
He even threatened his own servant.
He did. His servant, Mary Warren, was one of the accusers. Proctor reportedly said the girls were just mischievous and threatened to beat the fits out of Mary, believing some physical discipline would cure her affliction by exposing it as an act.
That kind of open defiance, questioning the girls' integrity, that made him a huge target.
Massive. If he could prove they were lying, the whole prosecution narrative collapses. So when his wife, Elizabeth, was accused and brought in for examination, Proctor stood up to defend her forcefully.
And that was his undoing.
Immediately. The girls turned on him right there in the examination room. He was accused himself, the first man to be formally accused in Salem Village.
And what happened with his servant, Mary Warren? Did she stick to her story?
Well, there was a moment, under pressure from Proctor perhaps, Mary Warren initially recanted her accusations and admitted that she and the other girls had been lying.
Really? That could have stopped things.
It could have. But the other girls immediately accused her of witchcraft. The pressure on her must have been immense. She quickly rejoined the circle of accusers, and then testified powerfully against both John and Elizabeth Proctor. It shows the terrifying power of the group dynamic.
So Proctor is imprisoned. But he doesn't give up. He writes a letter.
He does. From prison, knowing he's likely doomed, he writes this incredibly powerful, articulate letter to a group of influential ministers in Boston. It's a crucial document.
What does it say?
He lays bare the reality of the pre-trial examinations. He describes the use of torture, not necessarily state-sanctioned, but certainly applied by magistrates and others to force confessions. He talks about people being tied up head and foot till the blood was ready to start out of their nose.
Just brutal, forcing confessions out of innocent people.
Exactly. People confess simply to stop the pain, or because confessing, ironically, often delayed execution compared to maintaining innocence. Proctor pleaded with the ministers to intervene.
What did he ask for specifically?
He asked for the trials to be moved out of Salem, arguing the local judges and jury pool were already prejudiced, convinced of guilt. He asked for different judges, essentially appealing for a change of venue and judicial oversight.
A desperate plea for basic justice.
It was, but it was too late. The court was operating like a machine by then. John Proctor was convicted, largely on spectral evidence and the testimony of Mary Warren and others. He was hanged on August 19, 1692.
His execution must have silenced almost all remaining public skepticism.
Absolutely. The message was unmistakable. Question the court, question the girls, and you will hang. Dissent was effectively criminalized.
Yeah, it's just a total breakdown. Which leads us to Section 4. How does something like this finally end, the fever breaks and the reckoning?
Well, ironically, it doesn't seem to end because of a sudden wave of sanity or moral awakening in the general populace. It ends largely because of self-preservation among the elite. The accusers, particularly the core group of young women, seem to have gotten overconfident. Emboldened by their unchecked power, they started aiming higher and higher with their accusations.
Beyond local farmers and troublesome old women.
Way beyond. They started naming wealthy merchants in Boston, influential ministers, people connected to the ruling council. And then, the fatal overreach. They accused Lady Mary Phipps.
The wife of the governor, William Phipps?
The very same. Governor Phipps had been away dealing with the war effort on the frontier. He comes back to Boston in October 1692, finds his colony descending into chaos, dozens executed or jailed, the economy grinding to a halt, and learns his own wife has been named as a witch.
Okay, that gets his attention.
Suddenly it's personal. It's not just about distant villagers anymore. The accusations are hitting the very top of the political establishment. This threat to the elite seems to be the catalyst that finally forces decisive action.
So what does Phipps do?
In late October 1692, he issues orders. First, halt all the current proceedings. Second, dissolve the Court of Oyer and Terminer, that special court that had overseen all the convictions and executions.
He shuts it down.
Shuts it down. Then he establishes a new court, the Superior Court of Judicature, to handle the remaining cases. But crucially, he gives this new court one very specific instruction, likely influenced by increased matter and the growing unease in Boston.
What was the instruction?
Do not admit spectral evidence as the primary basis for conviction.
Ah, the key change.
The absolute key. Take away the spectral evidence, the core proof that had driven almost all the convictions and the entire legal basis for the prosecutions just crumbles.
What was the result in the new court?
Immediate and dramatic. The conviction rate absolutely plummeted. Juries were no longer forced to convict based on spectral claims alone. Of the 52 people brought before the new court starting in January 1693, 49 were acquitted.
Wow, from near 100% conviction to almost zero.
Exactly. The legal mechanism itself had been the engine of the crisis. Change the mechanism, the crisis stops. By May 1693, Governor Phipps had pardoned and released everyone still imprisoned on witchcraft charges. The fever broke because the legal tool allowing it to rage was finally removed.
But the cost, let's tally the human cost again, it's staggering.
It is. The final numbers are grim. Over 200 people were formally accused across Essex County and beyond. 19 people were hanged, 14 women, 5 men.
And then there's Giles Corey.
Giles Corey, an elderly man, also known for being stubborn. He refused to enter a plea guilty or not guilty, likely to avoid attainder, which would mean forfeiting his property and leaving his family destitute.
And the penalty for refusing to plead?
An archaic, brutal procedure called peine forte et dure. He was pressed to death under heavy stones over several days. A horrific end, but by remaining silent legally, he likely saved his farm for his heirs.
So that's 20 deaths directly through execution or pressing.
Plus at least 5 more people who died in the squalid prison conditions while awaiting trial or after conviction. So a minimum of 25 lives directly lost because of the trials.
And then comes the aftermath, the reckoning. Does apology or accountability come quickly?
No, it's slow, painful, gradual. It takes years. The first official step comes in January 1697, 4 years later. The Massachusetts General Court orders a colony-wide day of public fasting and prayer.
To atone.
Yes, explicitly to atone for the late tragedies and whatever errors might have been made. It's a cautious acknowledgement, not a full apology yet.
But there were individual acts of conscience. You mentioned Judge Samuel Sewell.
Yes, Sewell's apology is remarkable. He was one of the 9 judges on the Court of Oyer and Terminer. On that official fast day in 1697, he stood silently in his pew at Boston's South Church while his minister read aloud Sewell's written confession.
What did it say?
He took the blame and shame of the unjust verdicts upon himself, asking for forgiveness from God and the community. He was the only one of the judges to ever make such a public, personal apology, a truly profound act of remorse in that society.
What about the accusers? Did any of them ever express remorse?
One of the most prominent ones did, eventually, Ann Putnam Jr. She was one of the original afflicted girls in Paris's house, and arguably the most prolific accuser, responsible for many testimonies.
When did she apologize?
In 1706, when she was about 26 years old and wanted to formally join the Salem Village Church. Both her parents had died in the interim, perhaps leaving her more reflective or free to speak.
And what was her explanation?
She stood before the congregation, and her statement was read. She essentially blamed Satan. She said she'd been laboring under a great delusion of Satan during the trials, that the devil had deceived her in her childhood and used her to accuse innocent people. It's framed as her being a victim of satanic influence rather than malice, but it was an apology.
A way to reconcile, maybe. And legally, did the state ever fully reverse things?
Yes, finally. In 1711, the Massachusetts Bay Colony officially reversed the legal convictions, the attainders, of many of the victims, restoring their names and civil rights posthumously.
And reparations.
Yes, significantly. They also granted £600 in financial compensation to be distributed among the surviving victims and the families of those executed or who had died. It was a clear, tangible admission by the government that a grave injustice had occurred.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, the final synthesis. Why Salem? Why did this happen? It wasn't just superstition, was it?
Definitely not. It was this perfect storm, a convergence of human factors, human feelings, amplified by a legal system that went completely off the rails.
Let's list those factors again.
Okay, you had extreme social stress, the background trauma of war, the anxiety of that political vacuum without the charter, real economic hardship and resentment fueling those factional fights.
Layered onto that rigid Puritan worldview.
Right, where life was seen as a literal battle between God and Satan, and misfortune was often interpreted as diabolical attack. It provided the framework for understanding the initial afflictions.
Then the internal village politics, the Putnam versus Porter feud.
Which provided the targets, the grudges, the motivation for weaponizing the witchcraft accusations once the door was open.
The psychology, the girls.
The psychology of mass hysteria, certainly, but also maybe something darker. A group of powerless individuals, young women, an enslaved person, suddenly finding themselves wielding immense, terrifying power. The power of life and death, validated by the highest authorities. That's intoxicating.
And underpinning it all, the legal failure.
A catastrophic failure of the legal system.
Yeah.
That hastily created court, abandoning established common law principles, assuming guilt, and crucially, accepting spectral evidence testimony about invisible spirit attacks as factual proof. When the institutions designed to protect due process fail that badly, chaos is almost guaranteed.
So it's a story about a specific time and place, but it feels resonant, which brings us to the connection for you, the listener. It's easy to dismiss this as, crazy Puritans 300 years ago.
Right. But the core formula that emerges from the sources, the pattern, is chillingly timeless. You see it described as fear plus a trigger equals a scapegoat.
Explain that formula in Salem's context.
The fear was pervasive fear of God's wrath, fear of the devil, fear of the wilderness, fear of political instability, fear of economic change, fear of neighbors. The trigger was the girl's initial afflictions and the official diagnosis of witchcraft. And the scapegoats were initially the marginalized, but quickly expanded to include anyone who challenged the narrative or belonged to the wrong faction.
Okay, fear plus trigger equals scapegoat. Now, how does that connect to today?
Well, think about our world now. Are we immune to fear? We have widespread anxiety, economic uncertainty, political polarization, social isolation amplified by technology. Fear spreads incredibly fast now.
Faster than ever before.
And triggers. Misinformation, viral outrage, a single inflammatory incident can become a trigger. And the East versus them mentality seems stronger than ever, making it easy to identify and target scapegoats digitally, often.
Digital mobs, cancel culture arguments, the speed at which reputations can be destroyed online based on accusations, sometimes with very little due process or fact-checking.
Exactly. Salem teaches us that the underlying human tendencies succumbing to fear, the allure of groupthink, the willingness to abandon critical thinking and due process when scared or angry, the intoxicating nature of righteous outrage, those haven't gone away.
The technology changes, maybe, but the human element.
The human element remains remarkably consistent. The mechanisms change from whispers in a meeting house to viral posts online, but the potential for fear-driven injustice is always there.
So the final provocative thought we want to leave you with is this. Considering that formula fear plus trigger equals scapegoat and looking at our current climate.
Have we truly learned the lessons of 1692? Are our institutions, our commitment to due process and critical thought strong enough to prevent a modern version? Or perhaps is the next Salem just a different kind of witch hunt, maybe only a keyboard click away?
And so, another chapter closes. For more journeys into history's forgotten files, please like and subscribe. Your next story awaits.